We are engaging today with what is perhaps the most essential text in Advaita Vedanta, Sri Shankaracharya's Vivekachudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination. I think we can agree this work establishes a non-negotiable path, that liberation, or moksha, is achieved solely through the immediate realization of identity with Brahman, the absolute self, distinct from anything non-self.
That identity is everything. The realization that Brahman alone is real, the phenomenal universe is unreal, and that the individual soul is non-different from the universal soul. That's the absolute foundation for this entire teaching.
Absolutely. And that foundational metaphysical truth forces us to confront a highly subtle yet profoundly important question. It's about the Jivan Mukta, the being who is liberated while still embodied. We have to address the doctrine of prarabdha karma, those specific past actions responsible for sustaining the existence of the current physical body. So, the core question is this: does the ultimate realization of identity with the absolute self genuinely and immediately negate the experiential consequences of this ongoing prarabdha karma? Or must the realized individual still undergo the resulting experiences of the physical world until that body finally expires?
It really is the ultimate boundary condition of Advaita, isn't it? It's the collision between absolute truth and, apparent reality.
It is. I'll be arguing today for the necessary continuance and active experience of this karmic momentum. I think the continued existence of the realized body is itself the evidence of a residue that must be exhausted.
And I will maintain that from the standpoint of ultimate knowledge, the metaphysical truth is absolute. All forms of karma, including prarabdha, are founded upon ignorance, and they are therefore rendered null and void upon self-realization, regardless of any residual physical appearance.
Okay, so let's begin by defining the essential functional difference in karma. We both agree that knowledge completely destroys the binding power of sanchita, that vast store of accumulated actions, and agami, the actions that would be accrued in the future. But prarabdha, that's different. This is the portion of sanchita that has already been activated. It's already begun to bear fruit, and it's the engine driving the present body. And I think that engine, once started, possesses an inevitable momentum.
I acknowledge the traditional tripartite division, of course, but I would caution against re-anthropomorphizing that momentum. The text itself gives us the analogy of the arrow shot at a target. Once the arrow is loosed, even if the archer immediately realizes the target is not what he thought, say, realizing the target was a cow, not a tiger, the arrow cannot be recalled. It must continue its flight and land.
Precisely. And that analogy is used to demonstrate that this prarabdha is, and I'm quoting here, too strong for the man of realization. It's a physical, almost measurable force, a momentum that dictates that the actions that created the current form must be exhausted only by the actual experience of their fruits, whether those fruits manifest as joy or grief. I mean, if realization made the body instantly vanish, we wouldn't be having this debate. Exactly. But the body persists.
But the nature of that persistence is what we disagree on. The insistence on this delay or momentum, it conflates the state of the Atman with the state of the physical mechanism. From the perspective of ultimate truth, the Atman is pure consciousness. It's described as birthless, eternal, and undecaying. The Atman is not, and it never can be, the product of any action or work. So how can a portion of karma, this prarabdha, have any real bearing on the one who has transcended all action?
Because we are discussing the Jivan Mukta, the one who, by definition, is liberated in life. That very phrase requires the continuance of the body. If we deny the residual momentum of prarabdha, what alternative mechanism accounts for the fact that the body continues to breathe and eat and interact with the phenomenal world for years, sometimes decades, after realization? The ancient texts themselves speak of this unavoidable temporal gap. They state that the realized person's delay is only so long as his body lasts, after which he becomes one with Brahman. That necessary delay proves that a residual functional force is still operating.
That's a compelling point based on empirical observation, but I think it fundamentally misunderstands the ontological status of the body. The body is described in the text as merely an effect of Maya, of Niscience. It's fundamentally unreal, transient, like a mirage in a desert. So if the body has no true existence, how can the actions tied specifically to its apparent birth, this so-called prarabdha, have any true binding power on the Atman? To insist that an unreal body must exhaust a portion of karma is, well, it's to grant reality to two things the Janani has already discarded: the body and the action itself.
But there has to be a point of functional reality to explain the physical manifestation. Let's address this tension head-on. You claim that Brahman alone is real and everything else is unreal. If that is the absolute, instant truth, how can you then maintain that prarabdha is real just enough to cause the observed sustenance of physical existence? The body is described in, unflinching, visceral detail as a repulsive collection of skin, flesh, fat, bones, and filth. If the root of delusion, the belief in identity with this form, is destroyed, why doesn't the illusion just vanish immediately?
Because from the Jnani's perspective, the illusion has vanished. What you're calling experiential continuance is just the persistence of the phenomenal world, but it's experience without any identification. The mechanism just continues to operate until the stored energy runs out. Think of it like a computer that's had its central processing unit destroyed. The screen might still flicker for a moment on residual power, but there's no program running and no new input matters. The world is a superimposition, and the body's existence is just the persistence of that superimposition, until the causal root of avidya is totally dissolved. The rope is known, the snake is no longer perceived as a threat.
I would argue the snake is not merely a threat. It is still a physical object that takes up space and interacts with the world, even if the person knows it's a rope. The text explicitly say the results of prarabdha must be experienced. If the experience is just some residual flicker, why does the text also describe the body as being moved hither and thither by the wind of prana, just as it listeth? That sounds like a residual external compulsion, not simply a passive dissipation of energy.
But that description of the body being moved hither and thither like a dry leaf in the wind, that is the very definition of freedom from agency. It is only the ignorant onlooker who sees this mechanical motion and interprets it as binding. To the realized person, those actions, eating, walking, speaking, are reduced to a memory, just like actions performed in a dream state. The movement is non-binding because the actor, the sense of I am the doer, is completely absent. The body is just an apparent shadow that continues to move, but its existence is not real for the Atman resting in the absolute.
But this distinction between apparent and real experience, it needs closer inspection. If the experience of the body is just a dream or a memory, why the necessity for such severe, continued vigilance and practical efforts? Let's shift to the requirements for the seeker. The guru repeatedly insists on tremendous practical efforts.
Yes, this is a very important area where we often see confusion.
Exactly. The seeker has to renounce desires for external pleasures, achieve the highest state of absorption, and must carefully purify the mind. If prarabdha and the phenomenal world are totally irrelevant and unreal upon realization, why the repeated strong warnings to shun sense objects as thou wouldest do poison? Why is carelessness a straying of the mind called death itself? If the realization is complete and absolute, the need to purify the mind of a non-existent dreamt world should cease entirely. This suggests the latent seeds of karma, the subtle impressions, the vasanas, still retain a powerful potential to reassert the sense of duality, which proves the momentum is still functionally present.
That's a powerful reading, but I think it misses the essential purpose of those instructions. Those disciplines, calmness, self-control, dispassion, they are not evidence of ongoing karma binding the jnani. They are the necessary qualifications that serve to clear the mind of rajas and tamas before the truth can be perceived. They are the means to realization, not the ongoing requirement of the realized state. The mind has to be purified to remove the inherent turbulence that prevents the recognition of Brahman.
But if we look at the text, The warnings about falling from that state continue well into the description of the realized individual. Why the warning that even a slight straying of the mind from the goal goes down and down like a ball dropped on a staircase? If the identity with Brahman is fixed, irreversible, why the risk of sliding backward? This emphasizes the persistent power of the vasanas, those subtle propensities left by prarabdha, which require constant functional attention, lest the appearance of the world reclaim the individual.
Well, we have to distinguish between the jivan mukta, who is completely established, and the mumukshu, the serious seeker who is close but not yet utterly absorbed. The warnings about the staircase are directed at the advanced seeker who is attempting to purify the mind, acknowledging the deep roots of ignorance. Once established in the transcendent Brahman, the nature of existence is entirely altered. The realized being is described as behaving like one sleepy or like a child, or even roaming like a madman or a ghoul.
But that behavior, the seeming lack of conventional logic or social decorum, that could also be interpreted as the uncontrolled expression of the residual prarabdha running its course, moving the body in ways free from conscious, disciplined agamaya action.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that it's due to binding karma. The behavior described is the characteristic of profound freedom from identification. They are resting in the ethereal plane of knowledge absolute. Their continued interaction with the world is not driven by residual prarabdha, compelling them to experience joy or grief, but it's simply an appearance, a function that runs in the background. Their status is that of Brahman itself, utterly untouched by merits or demerits. The description of them roaming is the description of someone whose physical form is no longer directed by ego or desire, but by spontaneous action free from agency.
And yet, the function of the body as a result of action and the insistence that the result must be experienced remain direct textual statements. To claim the jnani merely appears to experience action to onlookers requires us to completely disregard the phenomenal structure laid out earlier. If the jnani has external perceptions and continues to interact with the world, that functional reality must be accounted for by the only karma left, the prarabdha that launched this current body. The realization has destroyed the agent who experiences, but not the necessity of the experience itself. The body persists because the momentum of the arrow has not yet run its course.
This line of reasoning, while it's strong on the practical side, it risks undermining the non-dual core. If the body, the organs, the vital airs, and the mind are all reduced to the paramatman by the fire of realization, then the being is Brahma, the body is shed like a snake slug while living. If the bodies, which are composed of niscience, have been burned by realization, how can Brahman, who is without parts, without activity, calm, ever be subject to any idea of limitation or karma? The physical momentum is merely an inertial force, a flickering shadow that moves until its fuel is spent. But this existence is non-binding and utterly unreal for the transcendent Atman.
I think we've reached the heart of the matter, the functional dichotomy within Advaita. I maintain that the functional reality of prarabdha accounts for the phenomenal appearance and the time-bound experiences of the realized person until physical death. The arrow must land. This is the necessary cost of having taken birth in the first place, even if the archer has realized the illusion of the target.
And I would reaffirm the absolute metaphysical truth. The body and all karma are products of niscience and are entirely unreal in the highest sense. The ultimate status of the jnani is that they are transcendent Brahman, utterly untouched by action. The continuance of the body is residual motion. It signifies no bondage, no real experience, and no lingering need for karmic exhaustion on the part of the self.
This discussion really highlights the profound complexity of the Vedantic framework. It forces us to navigate the gap between absolute, non-dual truth and the observable, phenomenal appearance that persists in the life of the realized being.
Indeed, the great teaching is that realization moves beyond the constraints of place, time, and works. I think the fundamental question we leave for our listeners is whether the jnani's persistence in the world is a temporary function of the unreal that must be experienced, or merely a spontaneous, non-binding dissipation of energy that has no bearing on the realized self.
There is clearly still so much profound investigation to be done within this extraordinary text.